Thank you. Mr. Luetkemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the witnesses for their testimony. It's been very compelling. I happened to have the opportunity to go to Israel back in August, and we met with our group, both Democrats and Republicans, met with the leadership both there in Israel as well as Palestine. And they were adamant in their analysis of the situation that Iran would have the nuclear capability by the end of the year. If that's the case, I think it's being very naive from the testimony we've heard this morning that we've got plenty of time with which to deal with this. I think that the sense of urgency is necessary in order to be able to confront this, have a plan ready to confront it. I haven't heard that plan yet this morning. I've heard some ideas, but I haven't heard that plan. If we're going to be ready for this, we need to have this sense of urgency that we have the ability to contain this or deal with it, as the ambassador just said. You know, one of the concerns I have is that, you know, sanctions are only part of one of the layers of ways to deal with this, and diplomacy is one of the ways. But the folks in the Middle East don't seem to be able to understand that with diplomacy comes commitment, and they don't seem to be willing to live up to commitments. We can get commitments from them, but they just ignore it. It's just a statement that they can throw away. There doesn't seem to be any willingness to complete their commitment. And so in that light, knowing we have a sense of urgency, knowing we have a difficult group to deal with, knowing that they probably, if don't have it already, will have very, very, very shortly nuclear capabilities, where do we need to go with our sanctions and our diplomatic efforts? Because if we get another North Korea, which ignores diplomacy, which ignores the international community, how do we deal with those folks? Ambassador, would you like to start?
Well, I think, first of all, I think that deadlines and a sense of urgency may tend to work against us rather than for us. They don't feel a sense of urgency. If we feel a sense of urgency, then we're the ones under the gun. We're the ones who are constantly pressured to come up with new ideas, new proposals, new diplomatic offers.
Yeah, but don't you feel we need to be ahead of the curve on this? Don't you feel we don't need to be proactive rather than reactive?
I'm not arguing that we shouldn't be. I am arguing that we need a sustainable policy, a policy that will continue to penalize Iran, will continue to make it, over the longer term, unattractive for Iran to either gain or retain a nuclear capability. We need to maintain an international consensus which isolates Iran and penalizes them in that regard. And to the extent we become fixated on a particular deadline, we're the ones who then become under pressure. We're the ones who are then find our position weakened by that kind of time pressure. So I understand the apparent urgency. Now, I'm not sure you said the Israelis thought they'd have a nuclear weapon by the end of the year. I don't know what year that refers to.
This year.
Well, they're certainly not going to have one by the end of this year. So I think we can dismiss that possibility. I don't think they're likely to have a nuclear weapon by the end of next year either.
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Ambassador, here's an article from the Times online, December 14th, that secret document exposes Iran's nuclear trigger. They have their final component of the nuclear bomb. They're working on it as we speak.
If Iran has nuclear materials for a weapon, they have a facility we don't know about and can't bomb because we don't know it exists and we don't know where it is. So if Iran could develop a nuclear weapon at this point, they would do it in a way that we would have absolutely no way of stopping unless we invade and occupy the entire country. The uranium they do have, which we know about, is not capable of creating a bomb and wouldn't be capable of creating a bomb for several years because it requires extensive further enrichment, which the Iranians do not at the present have the capability of doing, but which they could do over an extended period of time. So it's possible they have nuclear material we don't know about, but if so, then our options are pretty limited.
Well, not to belabor the point, but Dr. Maloney made the point in her testimony that gave at least two examples where we had underestimated what was going on in Iran. And to me, if we've already underestimated twice, it would seem logical that it's very possible we underestimated them again. And this, when you're dealing with a nuclear bomb and a regime such as that, to underestimate those folks is very, very dangerous. Anybody else like to comment on the discussion?
You also posed in your question the idea of where do we go next, and I think that needs to be the focus of the deliberation at this stage, and particularly with respect to IRPSA. Where we go next is not more unilateral measures that have limited or counterproductive impact within Iran. Where we go next is to the UN Security Council, test how successful we've been in changing the dynamic with the Russians, test how serious the Chinese are, as they've suggested, at least in some rhetoric, about applying new pressure to Iran, and test the Europeans and see if they're finally willing, for perhaps the first time since the revolution, to put their money where their mouth is when it comes to Iran. I think that's the route that we go, and we will not succeed fully, but I think that we can have some real impact in crafting the kind of measures that, as Robin suggested, have already begun to make important elites within Iran, people who really do have some influence over the future of its policies on core security issues, stand up and take notice. And that's the sort of thing that can pay off, but it will take time.
I appreciate your responses, and I would love to ask more questions, especially with regards to how in the world we can get the rest of the world to go along with us when half the world sides with Iran right now. But I realize my time's out. I appreciate the Chairman's indulgence. Thank you.
I just have one brief thought. Implicit in your statement is some knowledge that we have about where Iran is. And the bottom line is, if you think we knew too little about what was going on in Iraq, try Iran. We know even less. And that's a sobering reality when it comes to figuring out down the road. But I will also say that if you thought Iraq was a complicated war, try Iran. That the military option is not just an issue of using strategic bombing of suspected targets, which would clearly backfire and clearly galvanize the population around the regime, however much they hate it. But would, because of the nature of conflict and our own deployment of troops in both neighboring Iraq and Afghanistan, force the United States to engage in something that was far broader and would look like an open-ended war with Iran. So I think that when we talk about these options, yes, sanctions are frustrating, that the military option is one that is so costly, and we make such assumptions about being able to go in and it having some impact, that could be, in many ways, the worst thing to do, because it would also encourage people to think they need the bomb to protect themselves.